Sanbonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 129 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. It's a Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast. And well, before you get your weekend started, you know, we always want to talk property and make sure that we get that last little bit of all things relating to property before we start drinking, your wine or champagne or beer. Some of you at home are probably watching us drinking exactly that. Well, welcome to our viewers, whether you're watching us from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or certainly on YouTube. We do welcome you. Of course, we love hearing and interacting with you on our various social media platforms. So do show us that love. If you're watching us on Facebook, always drop us those green hearts as well as across the other social media platforms. Now, this evening we're talking about something that I know can be so contentious. I know this because every time we talk about it, a lot of you at home always share your experiences. I know because I live in this kind of property and I've seen my fair share of sort of drama living in this kind of community. And of course, you've guessed it, we're talking about sectional schemes. And this evening we're looking at sectional title ownership top tips on how to get it right the first time. So if you are a prospective new owner, perhaps you've already bought and you've bought into a sectional scheme, these are some of the tips that are going to help you better understand what living in a sectional title community essentially means. I think so many of us probably buy into sectional schemes and we don't quite know what it means, what the implications are, what we can and cannot do. And it's actually just caused so much, turmoil. I mean, I always tend to see a lot of conversations, sometimes from residents, sometimes even from people who are renting. Your landlord probably didn't share what the rules of that particular estate or, that block of flats are, and you go and do something that you're very likely not allowed to do. Well, that's certainly something that we're going to be exploring this evening. And the question that I'm asking you this evening is, if you're living in a sectional title community, what have been some of the rules that you found out about after the fact, or if you've just bought into one or you're just about to buy into one, what have been some of the rules that you really don't quite agree with that have kind of annoyed you just slightly? And even what are some of the rules that you learned about that you're actually quite happy with, that you probably would have never thought of, but when you sit back, you're like, actually, I see why this rule is there and I quite agree with it. Do share with us here down below. Well, the gentleman who's going to help us better understand and give us those tips to help us as we buy those sectional title, or rather buy into sectional titles, is somebody who's no stranger to Private Property Podcast. And that's, of course, Michael Schaefer, who's the founder of ZDFin. Good evening, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Zama, and hello, listeners. Thank you very much for inviting me to your show once again. It's a great way to end out a great week.
I know, right? I mean, we've had such an incredible week in talking property, and I think you are like the great cherry on top. And I mean, Michael, you've got 2 decades worth of knowledge, especially when it comes to sectional community, certainly within the property space. And I think one of the things that we certainly want to leave the viewers with this evening is just a better understanding of living in sectional titles. I mean, we speak about it quite a lot here on the podcast, and it's something that we'll continue speaking about because even people who already live in sectional titles still don't quite understand what the implications are, because they still have a sense of, well, this is my property, I've bought it, I can do whatever I want in any area of the property that I own. Perhaps before we even get to some of the tips, maybe explain to our viewers, we'll say the major implication with living in a sectional title community.
Well, Zana, thank you. Yeah, I think, the first and foremost, I think, owners need to understand, or even prospective owners need to understand that, when you either live in or you're going to buy into a sectional title scheme, that you're almost buying into a community. That's the first thing. And like any communities, there are rules, there are regulations, and it's kind of high density living, and I think, you need to, ignorance isn't an excuse. I think, prospective buyers and owners alike, they need to take the time to familiarize themselves with the prevailing legislation, the prevailing rules. And, it directly affects their lives and their livelihoods and their well-being and their enjoyment of life. So, I think they do need to take that time. As I said to you previously, it's not something that people readily know about, so you do need to take the time to understand it. And, in this day of age with technology and the internet and that type of thing, it really doesn't take long to familiarize yourself. And, if you just put in body corporate or scheme management or scheme rules or anything into Google, I can assure you that's the majority of the large managing agents, some of the industry bodies like NAMA, certainly the Community Scheme Limit Service, which has been in existence for just over 4 years now. There's a whole wealth of information online, that is available to, both owners and, prospective owners alike. So I'd really encourage people, before they make the leap of, into, sectional title or community living, to just familiarize themselves with, some of the intricacies and some of the, the prevailing, the rules and legislation.
And you're on the people who are about to buy into sectional title communities. Perhaps, Michael, share, let's say, the first tip that you'd want viewers at home to know in order for them to get it right the first time. Because I think we've certainly spoken about how so many people end up finding out about certain rules after the fact because they either didn't ask or they didn't even know to ask. Perhaps what would be the first tip in order to help people get it right the first time around?
Okay, well, I think the very first thing, is to ask for a copy of the rules, okay, as well as the financials, and quite frankly, I think, maybe just an audience with the trustees or the chairman of the scheme, who can then provide some of those documents and, just to understand, what kind of a scheme are you buying into, also the, kind of the age group, is it a lot of retired people, elderly people, is it younger people? Because that's very much going to sort of, dictate, the kind of environment that you're living in. But, very definitely you want to see the rules. You want to, if you're an animal lover, you want to know if it's a pet-friendly complex or if it's not a pet-friendly complex. And then secondly, the financials as well. I think you want to familiarize yourself. It's not, you don't have to have a complex understanding of finance. I'm sure everyone's got access to a family friend or, someone that does their tax that could just, just have a cursory look and just make sure that, things look sort of like solid. And another very important thing, which I think a lot of prospective owners overlook is the mix between tenants and actual owners. How many is it predominantly tenants that, investor buyers that own the units that are letting them out, or is it owner living? To understand that sort of mix, because I think that makes quite a big sort of impact. So, to summarize, certainly, when one's chatting to the estate agents, I'd strongly encourage that you get the name of the trustee chairman, have a chat to them directly on the telephone or via email, get a copy of the rules, get a copy of the financials. I think that's absolutely critical. And, just, peruse the rules. It's again, ignorance isn't an excuse. And you don't want to buy in sort of unknowingly just to realize that there are some rules that sort of don't suit you or your sort of way of living. And, then it becomes like a contentious issue because you are bound by those when you buy in. So, yeah. So I think a little bit of preparation, generally speaking, it's generally people's single largest investment, their house. So, just do a little bit of homework like you would do for anything, and I think that's critically important. And also the managing agent, find out, who is the managing agent, chat to the managing agent. I work for the largest, sort of managing agents in the country for close to 20 years. And, there's not enough engagement. I think that, people are generally very receptive to prospective buyers because it's a relationship that is then forged for many years going forward. And they're very happy to impart information. And yes, I think just a little bit of preparation and just sort of understand. And I think people are very willing to share.
Mm-hmm. We are, of course, taking your questions and comments at home, whether you're watching us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Do share them through. Also asking you, what has certainly been your experience if you're a first-time home buyer who bought into a sectional title? Perhaps you came across some of the rules after you bought and weren't particularly happy. And also, which were some of the rules that you actually found to be quite useful? Do share with us your experience with living or buying or certainly investing in a sectional title community. We've got a comment here from one of our YouTube viewers rather, and this one is coming in from Queen Chisabe, who says the worst part of sectional title community, or rather the sectional title property, is the body corporate and the homeowners association. They are abusive. And another one here coming from one of the ringleaders on Facebook, Ubongs Sabakwena, who says sectional title is challenging. If it weren't for security, I don't think many people would buy into sectional title communities. And I think, Michael, this is a sentiment that we're sometimes sort of slowly seeing, that in as much as there's a convenient factor, especially as far as security is concerned, I mean, as much as doing the gardening and the maintenance gets taken care of as well, I think one of the big selling points, of course, is around security, because we live in a very unsafe country, unfortunately, and we want to have a sense of safety. And even though we've seen crime in sectional title communities, I think we feel just a little bit safer living in one. But we've also seen the upside that, unfortunately, your body corporate, or certainly the trustees, have been what one of our viewers called abusive. I've certainly heard people share that kind of sentiment, that they feel as though the trustees are kind of going overboard and aren't necessarily running the scheme as in the best interest of everybody who lives in there. Perhaps share with us, before we even get back to some of the tips, how viewers at home can mitigate that, because I see that quite a lot. I mean, we know that there are ways that you can report if trustees aren't doing something that as a community you feel ought to be done. Perhaps share with our viewers at home how they can mitigate those kinds of situations.
Yeah, so sadly, it's not uncommon, that you do attract, sometimes the position of a trustee may attract the wrong kind of person, and you might get a very sort of dictatorial sort of chairman that's, sort of abusive towards owners sort of incorrectly. And, I don't know whether many people know, but, the Community Ombudsman Service Act came out, close to 4 years ago. On the 7th of October marked the 4-year anniversary. And it's provided a very cost-efficient and cost-effective medium to report disputes and issues, which is then sort of escalated to, generally to a conciliation. And, if consensus is not reached, then an adjudication. And they have jurisdiction over all schemes, that's sort of sectional title bodies, corporate, homeowners associations, share block companies, the various sort of residential architectures. And, as I say, it's a very cost-effective, very sort of quick turnaround times. And, I think it's long overdue. And, I'd encourage sort of, any members who are experiencing any difficulties to first of all try and, sort of exhaust internal sort of remedies in terms of, perhaps approaching alternate trustees to try and, discuss or arbitrate sort of the issues. And if that doesn't reach, sort of any conclusion or satisfactory conclusion, then to lodge a dispute with CSOS, which will then provide sort of an unbiased, sort of conciliation of sorts. And if that doesn't sort of resolve itself, then it proceeds through to a formal sort of adjudication. And on that conclusion, the outcome there has the same authority as a court order. So, that's what can be done. And, as I say, I've seen some very successful, sort of judgments basically. And, it's a very effective medium to try and resolve disputes. Over and above that, if there are a number of owners that feel like-minded, the legislation does provide for 25% of the owners to instruct the trustees to call a special general meeting to consider any sort of special resolutions. So potentially, a board of trustees may be changed and new trustees may be appointed, or if it's a number of rules that are not correct or that are causing sort of like issues, the rules can be, reconsidered and revised and, amended. So there are various sort of mechanisms to, sort of dispute resolution. But I think what is important is to appreciate that, you're living in, kind of high density, sort of living, communal living. So, people need to, as far as possible, needs to be considerate to, their fellow owners, treat others as you'd have to treat unto yourself, I suppose. And again, that's why I say when you're buying into a scheme, if you're a youngish person, don't buy into a scheme where, the average age is, 65, because you're bound to kind of like butt heads. And conversely, if you're 60 years old, don't buy into a scheme where the average age is 30, because it's not really a good mix, and then again, back to the rules, have a look at the rules. Noise disturbances are obvious, very often it's, no loud music after, even 9 o'clock at night, which might not be sort of, directly consistent to the bylaws, but again, it's generally representative of the, of the demographic. That's sort of exactly. So, I think, and again, that's why I say to people, do a bit of preparation, meet with the trustees, also go to a trustee meeting. I'm sure the trustees wouldn't have an issue with that. Meet them, maybe meet a few owners, chat to the owners, find out, what their experiences are like. and, you know, and be aware of CSOS. I think CSOS is a very effective, body that has been put into place. And, you know, and owners pay for the privilege. You know, there's a CSOS levy that all owners contribute towards. And so, you know, it's long overdue. And, you know, they have the authority and the jurisdiction to get involved in disputes and to make unbiased, you know, sort of objective sort of determination. So that is always available to all owners. You know, no owner should feel that they're being abused or that they're being victimized in a place of, you know, of their living. It's just, that's not right.
You know, and Michael, I actually love that you point out the work that CSOS does, because it certainly is one of those, you know, important bodies that I think so many people at home likely don't know about. And I do urge you, if you're watching us at home, to go back to some of the episodes that we've had around sectional titles. We have had Michael on before. We've also had Zelinda van der Merwe, who's spoken about the work that the community on that scheme actually does and the process sort of behind reporting, whether the managing agent or certainly the trustee, because I think it is one of those things that a lot of us very likely did not know about. And you now may have an issue with trustees that are running, you know, your particular community, and you want different ways to be able to report them. We're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, I'll be taking your questions and comments. I see them. Dumisani on Instagram, I also see your question. I love your question because it's something that I actually wanted to ask Michael. I also have got questions from YouTube as well as Facebook. We're going to go for a quick break, and we're going to be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 129 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. This evening, I'm speaking to Michael Schaefer, who's the founder of ZDFin. And we are, of course, talking about community schemes. You want to get it right the first time around, whether you're somebody who's probably looking to buy into one, perhaps you already live in one, and really want to find out the best ways to navigate living in a community scheme. And if you're an investor, you probably also want to just better understand what that might mean for your investment. We're, of course, taking your questions and comments at home. And I also want to hear from you. If you're living in one or you've recently bought into one, what has your experience been with that? And going to your questions and comments at home, we've got one here from Instagram, from Utumisani M, who asks, why is it important to know the mixture of residents between the actual owners and the tenants?
I think very often, and as a generalized statement, if there are a lot of tenants that reside in a complex, you'll find that, you know, the owners are typically investment buyers, okay, and they're generally trying to maximize profits, which, you know, might lead, and I say again, it's generalized comments, but could well lead to, you know, sort of suppressing the levy or cutting certain costs. So maybe having, you know, the minimum amount of security available, you know, maybe not taking the best sort of landscaping option for the gardens, you know, maybe doing maintenance only when it's absolutely critical as opposed to, you know, sooner than later. So it's that type of thing. And again, you know, generally speaking, again, you generally find that owners, you know, look after their properties better than tenants. You know, so I think it's quite important to see that mix, and, you know, just, yes, I think it's important to understand that mix. And yeah, I think that's exactly why.
And, you know, I've certainly seen it, Michael. I think if I look at even where I currently live, the mix between, you know, us as owners and tenants tenant mix is relatively lower than owners, and the complex is well run, we're able to hold the trustees accountable. In the event where there's something that's wrong, we report it swiftly, because it's a place that we live in, where sometimes you find when a tenant is living in, or when there's a high percentage of tenants, sometimes they don't report things that are actually going to be fixed by the trustees, right? Because things happen. The trustees don't sometimes come to the place and inspect. Then good ones typically would do it regularly. Others don't. So I think when the owners live there, they take a bit of ownership of the community that they're living in. So report things that need to be fixed, they are fixed very swiftly, whereas sometimes we'll find something will stay broken for an extended period of time. And tenants kind of just keep it moving because they think, well, my apartment is fine. I don't need to report something that's like happening with, in the communal area. So you really do find that understanding the mix actually does go a long way. We've got a comment here from another ringleader from Facebook, Umatha Shingang, saying a previous podcast that touched on this empowered me to engage our trustees from a more informed view. Yay, I'm giving them a run for their money. I want those minutes and invite myself to their meetings, accountability. And that's an important one, because you're able to attend trustee meetings even as a regular community member. You don't have to be a trustee. You just aren't allowed to vote. You're able to have your say. In the event where a matter needs to be voted on, then you're not allowed to vote. Only the trustees would vote. So do make sure that you ask them for those minutes and you really do hold them accountable. And the episode that Martha is referring to is, of course, that one that we've actually had with ZDFin. We've had a few episodes with her around community schemes. And of course, the one that we also had with Michael on this very topic. I see Khomutso Tole on Facebook saying, thank you, I'm enjoying the show, very much informative. I have been missing out most. Well, Khomutso, welcome to the community. You certainly have been missing out. We're glad to have you with us. I'm sure you're going to enjoy the rest of the episodes that we have in store for you. And also do go back, whether it's here on Facebook or even on YouTube, to watch some of the older episodes. And I want to go to another question here on a comment, rather. I think it's coming from YouTube. And this one is also coming from Queen Shivase, who says, I agree, we are mainly there for security. And then she asks, how do we access it? And I think the question when she says, how do we access it, she's referring to CSOS. So how do they access CSOS in the event where they want to then, whether lay a complaint around their trustees?
Okay, so your managing agent should be able to help you. And if your managing agent can't help you, you can just go directly onto their website and engage them directly. There's just a form to fill out. But, just one word of advice, try and engage with the trustees first before you go to CSOS, because they're going to want to ensure that you've exhausted all internal, sort of remedies in terms of, dispute resolution internally before they get involved. So if you've got a dispute, just have some sort of evidence that, you've tried to engage with the trustees either directly or through your managing agents to try and sort of ventilate the issue and, sort of come to some sort of consensus. Because if you haven't done that, they're going to force you to, go back and do that first before they get involved. But yeah, so just through a managing agent or, directly to them through the website.
Mm-hmm. Queen actually, adds that she was fined for putting up a netball ring on her wall. As we're saying, so important to understand what the rules are, what you can and cannot do, especially in the common areas, because sometimes the rules would say you can't put up certain things because it essentially changes the look and feel of the community, and that's something that they do not want. Michael, any other tip that you'd want viewers at home to be aware of, especially when they're still in the relatively in the beginning stages of community life living? Because I think it really does take such a huge even mind shift. It took me such a long time to just, I don't know if I'm even fully used to it, living in a community scheme. Look, I'm about to move out, thankfully, but I think I'm still a bit in shock about it all. I used to say, I think when I first started moving here, one of the biggest shocks is you park your car and then you're walking up to your apartment and you're just bumping into these strangers. In my will, I'm like, I don't know these people, but they're in the yard because we are sharing essentially this big yard. And it was just so bizarre to me because I just did not grow up in that kind of setup. It probably took me nearly a year to just get used to running into people I do not know while I'm walking from my apartment to my car. Just that alone, I think, was just took a
I mean,
long.
Zama, you've actually raised, one of the big sort of pressure issues and contentious issues in complexes is parking. When you're buying, how much visitor parking is there? And I can tell you now that, I think I mentioned it previously, the 3 Ps, it's pets and parking and, people. But, parking is such a big issue because very often complexes don't have sufficient visitor parking.
Yeah.
So if you have lots of friends over to your place, make sure there's adequate visitor parking. Because if they start parking in someone else's sort of parking bay, which is generally exclusive use areas, then you start getting fines and clamping and exciting things. So, I think preparation, I can't stress enough the preparation. Look at the rules, engage with the trustees, look at the mixed owners to tenants. How big is the complex? Is it hundreds of units or is it a relatively small complex? What kind of age group of person is living there? These are all factors that, you want to look at and take into account and, and engage, speak to people that are involved or related to the complex, managing agents, trustees, other owners, tenants, chat to the guards. The guards probably have the most intimate understanding of what happens in the complex than anyone, which is probably the best guarded secret that, amongst managing agents, they know exactly what goes on. So, speak to them, and it's so easy just to find out. They'll tell you, so I think just a little bit of preparation and, speak to the right people, investigate it on the net, speak to CSOS directly, they'd be quite happy to, share information, to tips, industry bodies like NAMA, speak to them. They're the only sort of industry body of managing agents, speak to them. They'll share. They've got trustee training that, owners can certainly access that. So there's a wealth of information that is available, but I think, preparation is the key. Take a bit of time, look in, we certainly don't have enough time to go into the changes in the legislation, but make sure it's financially sound. Very often just to walk around the complex just to get a feel for the maintenance. Is it well maintained or the gardens kept? It will give you a feel, and generally that's correlated to the finances in any event. So just have a look, I think, a little bit of preparation, less haste, and, better preparation, happier owners.
Yeah. And you actually love the tip about guards because security guards know so much. If anything, this is also just a pro tip when you are looking to buy into a sectional scheme, whether as a homeowner or certainly as an investor. The moment you ask, securities around, okay, kunjani kahle kahle la, phila abantu abanjani, you get such a great sense of how that community scheme is like, what happens, what are some of the things that would put anybody off that you probably won't be able to spot when you're going for a show day, on a Sunday afternoon. They'll be able to give you really good insight and you're able to better understand what you're potentially about to get yourself into. So do make sure that you speak to the security guards. Sometimes even if it just means speaking to them after you've viewed and you're now done with the agent in the unit, as you're about to exit, you just call one of them up, have a quick chat with them. They're always actually just quite willing to, have that 5-minute chat for you to get a nice understanding of the, whether sometimes it's a building or the complex or the estate that you're about to buy into. We've got a comment here on our YouTube page, and this one is coming from Richie Mobs, who says, many people don't think about things like parking and such initially, and it turns out to be massive problems. I've actually seen, I think parking is such a nightmare because, especially, if you look at, let's say, Gauteng, where we are building complexes pretty much one on top of the other. And I think, a lot of the developers want to maximize space as much as possible. So you might have 1,000 units. And when you look at the visitor parking, it's almost it's not really zero, but it's pretty much like it might as well just be zero. And then when people have somebody over, you sometimes may have to park outside because it just isn't enough visitor parking. So it really is one of those issues that becomes so contentious, especially if you're not aware about what can or cannot be done. And as you're saying, I think sometimes people's visitors end up sort of parking in somebody else's bay, which is of course terrible because your car will get clamped, security gets called, maybe you're not in a good standing with your with your neighbors. So it can be quite a huge battle when you start thinking about it. I see one of the ringleaders is commenting there on Facebook, Shakong, saying good evening to Madam Speaker and the A-team. The A-team, of course, being the Facebook gang. And I know they're always going to be there. I think YouTube and Instagram and Twitter must start their own A-team, and we'll put the 4 A-teams up against each other. We are, of course, cooking up that great competition that's going to put the A-teams up against each other. So all I'm going to say is almost sharpen your knives and get ready, because we certainly do have something in store for you. Michael, any final tip before I let you go? I know people at home probably now want to get started with their Fridays. Those who haven't watched some of the older episodes, do watch the one we've had with Michael before, as well as Zelinda, because you want to be able to understand what to do when things go wrong, how to hold your trustees accountable, even how you can be part of, how you can be one of the trustees. Because as an owner, sometimes you don't even need to be an owner actually in order to be a trustee. So do make sure that you go back to some of those episodes and find out how you can do so. Michael, before I let you go, any final tip to viewers at home?
No, Zama, I think, not to be scared of it. I think I think it can be a wonderful fit. I think it can be a wonderful environment to live in, a safe environment. I think it is the way of the future, sort of, more sort of high density living. There certainly are a lot of sort of pros. And I think to, just safeguard against stress and sort of agitation down the line, just to do a little bit of preparation and make sure it's a good fit for you.
Mm-hmm. And that is certainly a great note to leave it on there, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And that is Michael Schaefer, who is the founder of ZDFin. And of course, it's always a pleasure to have Michael on the show. We certainly will be inviting him on for future episodes, because talking about community schemes, a lot of us find ourselves living in them, probably things we don't quite understand. There's so many things that happen. Perhaps the trustees are bullies, or they're not doing what they say they're going to be doing. And we are certainly here to help make that journey a little bit better. So do make sure that you go back to some of those great episodes where we've covered, sectional title communities, the do's and don'ts, and things that you certainly need to know. Well, that of course brings us to the end of the Private Property Podcast this week. It has been a great week talking property with you, and of course seeing the A-team on Facebook stepping up their game, the Instagram gang also staying consistent. Sometimes you think people are going to bring their A game on one day, but I think you guys have been bringing it on every single day. I do hope that you will continue as the days progress. We need more love on YouTube. I want to see more of those YouTubers commenting, asking questions right here. We're going to see what we can cook up to make this one a great competition. It's probably going to be one of those things that we end of the year with. So if you have any suggestions, I already know what I might want it to be, but if you have any suggestions, do drop them down here below. What would be a great price you'd want to see us giving away right here on the Private Property Podcast? Share your suggestions down here below. Well, folks, that's it from me, Zamantungwa Khumalo. I'm back again on your screens on Monday evening at 7 p.m. But for the weekend, I don't leave you alone. You are, of course, going to be with Chad over the weekend for the Developers Show. So do make sure that you stay tuned for that. That's it from me this evening. And as usual, hoping you're staying home and staying safe, and have a great weekend.
I'm Brian Kappa. I'm a 10-time South African motorcycling champion. My family and I have chosen to live in Fourways. There's some really great suburbs in our neighborhood. There's a lot of families living in the surrounding areas, in places like Lone Hill and Cedar Lakes. What draws people to Cedar Lakes is that it's so close to Broadacre Shopping Centre, Cedar Square, and Fourways Life Hospital. Lone Hill is a major draw card for many families. It's got some great smaller commercial centres and some fantastic schools like Crawford College. From an entertainment point of view, Monte Casino really comes alive at night. There's so much on the go, and there's an incredible energy in the area. Our family just loves the fast-paced lifestyle that Fourways brings. But honestly, the thing that attracted us most to this area was the active lifestyle that it offers. As a family, we've chosen to live in Fourways because of the lifestyle and convenience, and this is our neighborhood.